Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and like the video so you won't miss our true horror stories. The compass was spinning strangely. This usually happens when we're over a large iron bed or an electromagnetic problem, but we weren't. We were in a pine-covered forest in the Cascade Mountains of Washington, 3 miles from our base camp. The compass needle was turning slowly and carefully, as if it couldn't figure out which direction was north. I tapped the glass a few times, but nothing changed. "Sarge, are you seeing this?" I held it up towards Sergeant Donnelly, who was looking at his own compass with a frown that made the lines around his eyes deeper. It was October 2019, and we'd been sent into these mountains for what our commanders called advanced terrain navigation training under bad conditions. Translation: they wanted to see if we could find our way out of thick forest at night with very little equipment. Our unit, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, had been rotating through this exercise for weeks. Most teams finished without any problems. Radio back to base, follow the markers, make it to the pickup point by sunrise. But our group got the worst assignment, the deepest section of the forest. The part where the fog rolled in so thick you couldn't see your own boots. The part where, according to some of the local people in the nearby town of Granite Falls, things don't work right. We'd laughed at that. Soldiers always do, until the things they warned us about start happening. "Mine's doing the same thing," Donnelly said, his voice low and controlled. He was 43, built like a brick wall with 20 years of service marked by every scar and nickname. If he was worried, that meant something. "Ramirez, check yours." Staff Sergeant Antonio Ramirez pulled his compass from his tactical vest. Even in the dim green glow of our night vision goggles, I could see his expression change from confident to uneasy. "Yeah, spinning." "What the heck?" Lieutenant Callahan pushed forward through the group, his boots crunching on the carpet of wet pine needles. He was younger than the rest of us, 29, fresh out of officer training with that stiff by-the-book energy that either gets beaten out of you or gets you killed. "Gentlemen, compasses malfunction. It happens. We have GPS." He pulled out the handheld GPS unit command had given us. The screen flickered, then went dark. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He tried again, harder this time, frustration creeping into his movements. "Battery must have died." "Sir, we checked all batteries before insertion," Private Porter said. Sam Porter was the youngest among us, 22, still carrying that nervous energy of someone who wanted to prove himself. "Everything was fully charged." "Then it's broken," Callahan snapped, but his voice had lost its edge. He knew what we all knew. This wasn't normal. The fog pressed closer. It had rolled in about 30 minutes ago, slow at first, then all at once like the forest breathed out and couldn't breathe back in. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. The trees, towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks, became gray shadows. The ground beneath us softened. The moss and plants were thick enough to quiet every step. And it was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the faint crackle of static from our radios and the sound of 5 men breathing a little harder than they should. "Radio check," Donnelly ordered, lifting his handset. "Bravo 2 to base." "Do you copy?" "Static." "Bravo 2 to base." "How copy?" More static. Then a burst of noise, sharp and distorted like metal scraping metal. Then nothing. Ramirez keyed his own radio. Same result. He exchanged a look with Donnelly that said what none of us wanted to admit out loud. We were cut off. "All right," Callahan said, trying to sound in control. "We knew this area has poor signal. We keep moving. We hit the ridge line. We'll get higher ground and reestablish contact." "Sir, we don't know which way the ridge line is," Private Carter said. Devin Carter was quiet most of the time, the kind of guy who noticed things others missed. He'd been a tracker before enlisting. Grew up in rural Montana hunting elk and bear. If he was worried, I paid attention. Without compasses or GPS, we're navigating blind. "We follow the creek," Donnelly said, pointing toward the faint sound of running water somewhere to our left. "Water flows downhill. If we follow it, we'll hit the main trail eventually." It was solid logic, the kind of old-school navigation that didn't rely on technology. We'd all been trained in it. But something about the way the fog clung to the trees, the way the silence pressed against my eardrums, made me doubt even that. We moved in a tight column. Donnelly at the front, Callahan just behind him, then Ramirez, me, Porter, and Carter bringing up the rear. Our night vision goggles turned the world into shades of green and black. But the fog scattered the light, creating halos and false shapes that made it hard to tell what was real and what was a trick of the eyes. The creek was louder now, rushing over rocks somewhere just ahead. We pushed through a thick patch of ferns taller than my waist, their leaves wet and cold against my gear. The air smelled wrong. Not the clean scent of pine and earth I expected, but something heavier, musky, like wet fur left to rot. Anyone else smell that? Porter whispered. Yeah, I said. Probably a dead animal. Deer, maybe. Smells too strong for a deer, Carter said from behind me. And too fresh. We reached the creek. The water was fast and dark, cutting through the rocks with a sound that should have been comforting, but instead felt too loud in the unnatural silence of the forest. Donnelly knelt by the edge, filling his canteen, eyes scanning the opposite bank. That's when I saw them. Tracks. Not boot prints, not animal tracks, at least none I recognized. They were pressed deep into the soft mud along the creek bank. Each one at least 18 inches long, maybe more. 5 toes clearly defined with a wide heel and an arch that looked almost human. But no human foot left prints that big. And no human walked this deep into the forest barefoot. Sarge, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You need to see this. Donnelly turned, saw where I was pointing, and went still. Ramirez moved up beside him, crouching low to get a better look. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering over one of the prints, measuring its size. Grizzly, Porter suggested, but his voice cracked. Wrong shape, Carter said, kneeling beside the track. Grizzlies don't walk upright. These are bipedal. Could be fake, Callahan said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Some kind of prank. Hikers do that sometimes. Hikers don't come this deep, Carter said flatly. And these are fresh, maybe an hour old. See how the edges haven't collapsed yet. That meant whatever made them had passed through recently, while we were out here. And if the tracks led along the creek parallel to our intended route, that meant it might still be nearby. Ramirez stood, scanning the forest with his rifle raised. We keep moving. Stay alert. Eyes out. We followed the creek for another 20 minutes, the fog growing thicker, the cold seeping through our gear. The tracks appeared again, then again. Always alongside us, never crossing our path, but close enough to let us know we weren't alone. Then Porter stopped. Did you hear that? We all froze. Weapons up. Safety's off. I strained my ears, filtering through the sound of the creek, the faint rustle of wind in the high branches, the static hum of dead radios. And then I heard it. A low, deep sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a groan. Something in between. It echoed through the trees, vibrating in my chest like standing too close to a subwoofer. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. What the heck was that? Porter whispered, his voice tight with fear. Animal, Callahan said, but his hand tightened on his rifle. What kind of animal makes a sound like that? I asked. No one answered. The sound came again, closer this time. Off to our right, maybe 50 yards into the trees. Then silence. Then from our left, same distance, same sound. There's 2 of them, Carter said. Or it's moving, Ramirez countered. No way anything moves that fast through this terrain without making noise, Carter said. Trust me, I've tracked enough game to know. Donnelly raised his fist, signaling us to halt. We formed a defensive circle, backs to each other, rifles trained outward. The fog swirled around us, thick enough now that even with night vision, I couldn't see more than a few feet. My heart hammered. My finger hovered over the trigger. Every shadow looked like movement. Every shape in the fog could have been a threat. And then the radio crackled. Not static, not dead air. A voice. Distorted. Broken. Barely recognizable. But a voice. Bravo 2. Contact immediate. Fall back. That's base, Callahan said, grabbing his handset. Base, this is Bravo 2. Say again your last. We did not copy. More static. Then the voice again, clearer this time. Not alone. Something in the forest. Abort mission. Return to. The transmission cut off with a sharp burst of noise that made us all wince. Then silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Did they just tell us to abort? Porter asked. They told us we're not alone, I said. And that's when the tree snapped. Not a branch. A whole tree. The crack echoed through the forest like a gunshot, and we all spun toward the sound. Through the fog, maybe 30 yards away, I saw the silhouette of a massive fir tilting, then crashing down with a sound that shook the ground beneath our boots. No wind. No reason for it to fall. Just gone. Move, Donnelly barked. Now double time. We ran. Not a tactical retreat, not a controlled withdrawal. We ran like prey, boots pounding the wet earth, gear rattling, breath coming in ragged gasps. The fog thickened, the trees blurred together. I lost track of direction, of distance, of everything except the man in front of me and the sound of something massive moving through the forest behind us. Branches snapped. Heavy footfalls thudded against the ground. And that sound, that low, resonating call, followed us through the dark. We burst into a small clearing, collapsing against a fallen log, gasping for air. Donnelly did a head count. All 5 of us still alive, still together. But as I looked back into the fog, I saw them. 2 shapes, tall, impossibly tall, standing just at the edge of the clearing, watching. Not moving, just watching. And that's when I knew the training exercise was over. Whatever we were dealing with now, it wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't something Command had briefed us on, and it sure as heck wasn't something we were prepared to face. We didn't speak for a full minute, just stared into the fog where those shapes had been standing. My hands shook on my rifle, adrenaline burning through my veins like gasoline. Porter was breathing too fast, on the edge of hyperventilating. Carter had his hand on Porter's shoulder, whispering something I couldn't hear, trying to keep him calm. Donnelly finally broke the silence. Did everyone see that? We all nodded. No point denying it. Whatever we'd seen it together. Height estimate? Callahan asked, and I was surprised his voice stayed steady. 8 feet, Carter said without hesitation. Maybe more. Hard to tell through the fog, but definitely taller than any man. Could have been trees, Ramirez offered. But he didn't sound like he believed it. Shadows playing tricks. Trees don't move, I said. Those things were watching us. I saw the way they shifted when we ran. Callahan pulled out his map, though it was useless without compass bearings. He studied it anyway, probably just to feel like he had some control. Base told us to abort. We need to get back. Which direction is back? Porter asked, voice cracking. We've been running blind. Could be anywhere. He was right. In our panic, we'd lost all sense of direction. The fog had disoriented us completely. For all we knew, we'd been running in circles. Donnelly stood, rifle slung across his chest, and pulled out a small notebook. He'd been keeping track of our movements, noting landmarks, time intervals, direction changes. Old habits from before GPS, when soldiers navigated by dead reckoning and terrain features. We came from southeast. Creek was flowing northwest. If we backtrack along this ravine and pick up the creek sound again, we can follow it downstream. That'll take us toward lower elevation. Eventually, we'll hit the logging road. It was the best plan we had. Carter agreed with the assessment. And between the 2 of them, they had more wilderness experience than the rest of us combined. We formed up again, tighter this time, no more than arm's length between each man. Donnelly took point with Carter beside him, both scanning the terrain. Ramirez and I flanked the middle. Callahan and Porter brought up the rear. We moved slowly, methodically, weapons up, fingers on triggers. Every few steps, we'd stop and listen. The forest was still too quiet. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just our boots on wet earth and the distant sound of water. How long until dawn? Porter whispered. I checked my watch. For hours, maybe 5. "We can make it," Donnelly said, though I wasn't sure if he was trying to convince us or himself. We pushed through a dense section of undergrowth. Ferns and devil's club thick enough that we had to use our hands to clear a path. The plants were wet, soaking our gloves, and the cold was starting to bite through our gear. October in the Cascades meant temperatures dropping fast after sunset, and the fog made everything worse. That's when we found the first marker. A tree maybe 30 feet tall with bark stripped away in long vertical gouges. The wood underneath was pale and fresh, sap still bleeding from the wounds. The marks were high, higher than any of us could reach, even standing on each other's shoulders. And they were deep, carved with something strong enough to tear through bark and heartwood like it was paper. Carter examined them closely, running his gloved hand along the grooves. Territorial marking. Bears do this sometimes. But he trailed off. "But what?" Callahan pressed. "These aren't claw marks. Wrong pattern. And no bear reaches this high." He looked up at the top of the gouges, easily 10 feet off the ground. Whatever made these was tall, and it wanted something to know this was its territory. "Then we're in its territory," Ramirez said flatly. We found 3 more marked trees in the next 100 yards. All the same pattern, all the same height, and they seemed to form a perimeter, a boundary we'd crossed without knowing it. The creak sound grew louder. We were close. Donnelly signaled us to move faster, but carefully. The ground sloped downward, roots crisscrossing the path like trip wires. Porter nearly went down twice, catching himself on trees at the last second. And then we heard it again, that sound. Low, resonating, vibrating in our chests. But this time it was different. This time it sounded like a call. And from somewhere deeper in the forest, another sound answered it. "They're communicating," Carter said, his face pale even in the green glow of night vision. "How many do you think there are?" I asked. "At least 2, maybe more." The creek appeared through the fog, rushing over rocks, the sound almost comforting in its normalcy. We reached the bank and stopped. The tracks were there again. Fresh ones, multiple sets, some heading upstream, others down. They'd been here recently, minutes maybe. "Which way?" Porter asked, voice tight. Donnelly studied the tracks, then pointed downstream. "That way, lower elevation, toward the road." We followed the creek, moving faster now. The water guided us, gave us purpose. But every few minutes we'd hear that sound. Sometimes close, sometimes distant, always around us, always watching. Ramirez keyed his radio again, hoping for a miracle. Static, then a burst of that metallic scraping sound that made us all wince. He was about to give up when a voice broke through. Clearer this time. "Bravo 2, this is Overwatch. We have your last known position. Air support inbound. ETA 30 minutes. Mark your position with infrared strobe and take cover. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Acknowledge." Ramirez grabbed the handset so fast he nearly dropped it. "Overwatch, this is Bravo 2. We copy. Moving to extract point. Be advised, we have multiple unknown contacts in the area. Requesting immediate evacuation. Negative Bravo 2. Evac not possible in current conditions. Visibility 0. You need to get to the logging road. Coordinates follow." The radio crackled coordinates that Callahan frantically scribbled down. We still had no working GPS, but at least we had a destination. The logging road was roughly 2 miles southwest of our current position. 2 miles through forest occupied by something that could snap trees and mark territory 10 feet off the ground. 30 minutes? Donnelly said. "We can make 2 miles in 30 minutes if we push hard." "What about them?" Porter asked, gesturing vaguely at the forest around us. "We avoid contact, move fast, stay quiet. If we see them, we don't engage unless we have no choice." Donnelly looked at each of us. "Command said not to engage. That means they know what's out here. And if they're telling us not to fight it, that means fighting is a bad idea." That should have been reassuring. Command had a plan. Help was coming. But the fact that they specifically ordered us not to engage made my stomach twist. What the heck were we dealing with that the army didn't want us shooting at? We moved faster now, pushing through the forest with purpose. The fog thinned slightly as we descended, visibility improving to maybe 20 feet. I could make out more details now, the twisted roots, the moss-covered logs, the way the trees seemed to lean inward like they were closing around us. The creek widened into a small stream. We splashed through it, boots soaking, the cold water biting even through our gear. On the other side, Carter suddenly froze, raising his fist. We all stopped. He pointed ahead. Through the fog, barely visible, something moved. Not walking, not running, just standing, shifting its weight, watching. My heart hammered. I raised my rifle, sighting through the scope. The night vision amplified what little light existed, and I saw it clearly for the first time. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Broad shoulders, arms hanging low, almost to its knees, covered in dark hair, thick and matted. The face was the worst part. Not quite human, not quite ape, something in between. The eyes caught the faint light and glowed amber. Intelligent, aware, tracking our every move. It didn't charge, didn't roar, just stood there, blocking our path. "Back up," Donnelly whispered. Slow, no sudden moves. We stepped backward, weapons trained on the creature. It watched us but didn't advance. And then from behind us, that sound again. The call. We spun around and saw another one. Same height, same build. We were boxed in. "Form a circle," Callahan ordered, his voice finally showing cracks. "Cover all sides." We pressed together, backs nearly touching, rifles pointing outward. Through the fog, I counted at least 3 shapes now, maybe 4. They'd surrounded us, herded us away from the creek, away from our escape route, into this small clearing hemmed in by dense undergrowth. "Why aren't they attacking?" Porter whispered, his voice shaking. "They're sizing us up," Carter said. "Predators do this. Figure out if prey is worth the risk." "We're not prey," Ramirez growled, but his hands were white-knuckled on his rifle. One of them moved closer. Not aggressive, just curious. Tilted its head, studying us. The amber eyes fixed on me, and I felt my blood go cold. There was intelligence there, not animal cunning, something deeper. It knew we were afraid. And maybe, just maybe, it was deciding whether to let us leave. "Infrared strobe," Donnelly said quietly. "Now." Callahan pulled the strobe from his vest and activated it. The device would be invisible to us, but would flash bright for any aircraft with infrared capability. It was our beacon, our lifeline. The creature watching me saw the movement. Its eyes tracked Callahan's hand, and then it made a sound. Not the low rumble. This was sharper. A grunt. A warning, maybe. The others responded. The circle tightened. They were closer now. Close enough that I could smell them. That musky, rotten first smell that had followed us all night. "On my mark, we move," Donnelly said. "Southwest, fast and hard. Don't stop for anything." "They'll chase us," Porter said. "Yes, they will. But we're faster over short distances. We get to the road. We have air support. We can make it." I wasn't sure I believed him, but I didn't have a better plan. 3, 2, 1, go. We broke formation and ran. Behind us, the forest erupted. Trees cracked. Branches snapped. Heavy footfalls thudded against the ground. The creatures gave chase, and they were fast. Faster than anything that size should be. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life. Gear rattled. Lungs burned. Boots slipped on wet ground. Branches whipped my face, and behind us, getting closer, that sound. That terrible resonating call that vibrated through the trees. Porter stumbled. Carter grabbed him, yanked him upright, kept him moving. We crashed through undergrowth, tore through thicket, leaped over fallen logs. The fog swirled around us, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. And then the ground dropped away. We skidded down a steep embankment, sliding through mud and loose rocks, unable to stop. I hit the bottom hard, pain shooting through my shoulder. Ramirez landed beside me, cursing. Porter rolled past us, crashing into a tree. Above us, at the top of the embankment, the creatures appeared. 3 of them, silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky. They stood there, looking down at us, not pursuing, just watching. "Why aren't they following?" Callahan gasped. Carter pointed ahead. Through the trees, barely visible, I saw it. Lights. The logging road. We'd made it. We were at the boundary of whatever territory they'd claimed. They don't want to leave the forest, Carter said. Roads too exposed, too open. The creatures watched us a moment longer. Then, one by one, they turned and disappeared back into the fog. We staggered to our feet, battered and exhausted, and stumbled toward the road. The moment we broke through the tree line, the change was immediate. The air felt lighter. The oppressive silence lifted, and in the distance I heard it, the thump of helicopter rotors. We collapsed on the gravel road, chests heaving, hands shaking. The helicopter appeared minutes later, searchlight cutting through the darkness, illuminating us in brilliant white light. As they pulled us aboard, I looked back at the forest. The fog still clung to the trees, thick and impenetrable. And somewhere in that darkness, I knew they were still there, watching, waiting. We'd made it out, but others would come after us. Other training exercises, other patrols. And I wondered if they'd be as lucky as we were, or if the forest would finally claim what it wanted. The helicopter ride back to base should have felt like relief, safety, escape. But as I sat strapped into the seat, wrapped in a thermal blanket someone had thrown over my shoulders, all I felt was cold. Not from the October air rushing through the open door. This was deeper. The kind of cold that settles into your bones when you realize the world isn't what you thought it was. None of us spoke during the flight. Porter stared at his hands, shaking even under the blanket. Carter gazed out at the forest below, jaw clenched tight. Ramirez had his eyes closed, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping. Callahan sat rigid, arms crossed, face unreadable. And Donnelly just stared at the floor, lost in whatever thoughts soldiers carry when things go sideways. The crew chief tried to hand us water. We took it but didn't drink. He asked if anyone needed medical attention. We shook our heads. What were we supposed to say? That we were fine? That we'd just been hunted through the forest by something that shouldn't exist? When we touched down at base, the rotors still spinning, we were met by men in different uniforms. Not our unit, not even regular army. These were clean, pressed, no unit patches visible, just name tags and rank insignia. And standing in the center of them was a man in civilian clothes, 40s, graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses that caught the floodlights. "Gentlemen," he said as we climbed out, his voice calm and measured, "I'm Dr. Richard Vance. I'll be conducting your debrief. Please follow me." It wasn't a request. We were led not to our barracks, not to the command building, but to a structure on the far side of the base we'd never been inside. No windows, heavy security door. Inside, it looked more like a research facility than a military building. White walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant. They separated us each into different rooms. I found myself in a space no bigger than an interrogation cell, sitting at a metal table across from Dr. Vance and a younger man he introduced as Dr. Kemp. A recording device sat between us, red light blinking. "Before we begin," Vance said, sliding a document across the table, "you'll need to sign this." I picked it up. Non-disclosure agreement. Dense legal language, but the gist was clear. I would not speak about what happened tonight to anyone, ever, under penalty of court-martial and federal prosecution. "What if I don't sign?" I asked. Vance smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll spend the next 72 hours in isolation while we determine if you're experiencing combat stress, hallucinations, or other psychological breaks that require extended observation and treatment. And your family will be notified that you've had a mental health crisis." The threat was clear. Sign or be branded unstable. I signed. "Good. Now, tell me everything that happened from the moment you lost radio contact." I did. Every detail I could remember. The spinning compasses, the tracks, the marked trees, the creatures, the chase. I expected him to look skeptical, to suggest I'd imagined it, to tell me it was shadows and fear. But he didn't. He just nodded, made notes, asked clarifying questions. "Height estimate on the entities?" he asked. 8 feet, maybe taller. Build, broad, muscular, arms longer than proportional to body. Eye coloration? Amber, reflective in low light. Did they vocalize? Yes, deep, resonating sound, almost like a call. And they answered each other. Coordinated behavior? Definitely. They boxed us in, herded us away from the creek. Vance exchanged a glance with Kemp. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. What did you see? I asked. You're not surprised. You already knew they were there. Vance set down his pen. What I know and what I'm authorized to tell you are different things. But I can say this. You are not the first group to encounter anomalous entities in that region. And you won't be the last. Anomalous entities, I repeated. You mean Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever the heck those things were. I mean unidentified bipedal hominids that exhibit characteristics inconsistent with known primate species, Vance said carefully. We've documented encounters going back decades. Most are inconclusive tracks, sounds, brief sightings. What happened to your unit tonight is significant. Significant how? You engaged with multiple entities simultaneously. You observed coordinated behavior, territorial marking, and communication. That's more data than we've gathered in 20 years. He leaned forward. Tell me, did you feel at any point that they were trying to kill you? I thought about it. The chase, the way they'd surrounded us, the sheer power they displayed. No. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. They were warning us off, pushing us out of their territory. Exactly. Vance made another note, which suggests intelligence, restraint, and understanding of boundaries. So what now? I asked. You've got your data. What happens to us? You return to your unit, you complete your service, and you never speak of this again. The official report will state that your team experienced equipment failure and disorientation in adverse weather conditions. You were successfully extracted. No anomalies occurred. And the truth? The truth is classified for reasons you're not cleared to understand. He stood, signaling the interview was over, but I wasn't done. Why do you keep sending people in there? I asked. If you know what's in those mountains, why keep running exercises in that area? Vance paused at the door. Because we need to understand them, their range, their behavior, their numbers. And the only way to do that is controlled exposure. Your unit wasn't sent there by accident. You were sent there because we knew there was a possibility of contact. We were bait, I said flatly. You were researchers, Vance corrected, whether you knew it or not. And the data you've provided tonight is invaluable. He left, the door locked behind him. I sat alone in that white room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and tried to process what I'd just been told. We'd been used, sent into the forest, not for training, but as part of some long-running study of creatures the government refused to acknowledge existed. An hour later, maybe more, they let us out. We gathered in a waiting area, the 5 of us. We looked at each other and I could see the same realization in every face. We'd all been told the same thing. Sign the papers. Keep quiet. Pretend it didn't happen. This is insane, Porter said, his voice barely above a whisper. They can't just cover this up. They can and they will, Callahan said. He looked older somehow, the experience having stripped away whatever naive confidence he'd carried before. And we're going to let them because we don't have a choice. We could tell someone, Porter insisted. Media, Congress, someone. And say what? Ramirez asked. That we saw Bigfoot? They'll destroy us. Dishonorable discharge. Label us mentally unstable. Ruin our lives. That's what they do to people who break these agreements. He was right. We all knew it. The system was designed to protect itself, and we were just pieces in a much larger game. Did they tell you why? Carter asked quietly. Why they keep sending people in there? Research, I said. They want to understand these things, behavior, territory, numbers. But why? Carter pressed. What's the endgame? What are they planning to do with that information? None of us had an answer. Maybe the doctors didn't either. Or maybe they did, and it was buried under so many layers of classification that even asking the question was dangerous. We were released back to our barracks near dawn. The other soldiers were just waking up, getting ready for morning formation, going about their normal routines. To them, it was just another day. They had no idea what we'd been through, what we'd seen, what we'd been forced to bury. I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, exhaustion pulling at me, but sleep refusing to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Those shapes in the fog, those amber eyes, that intelligence looking back at me. Over the next few days, we tried to return to normal. We ran drills, cleaned equipment, followed orders. But something had changed. We moved through the motions, but the bond between us was different now. Heavier. We shared a secret that isolated us from everyone else. Porter requested a transfer within a week. They granted it, sent him to a base in Texas, far from any mountains or forests. Carter finished his service and went home to Montana, though I heard later he never went hunting again. Couldn't bring himself to walk into the woods. Callahan stayed in the Army, climbed the ranks, never mentioned that night again. Last I heard, he was a colonel stationed overseas. Ramirez and I kept in touch for a while, but eventually we drifted apart. The weight of what we carried was too much to share, even between us. And Donnelly put in his retirement papers 2 months later. 20 years of service, and he walked away. I ran into him once, years later, at a veterans event. We recognized each other across the room, and for a moment I thought about going over, asking how he was doing, maybe finally talking about what happened. But he looked at me, shook his head slightly, and turned away. The message was clear. Some things are better left buried. I stayed in for another 6 years before getting out. Took a job as a contractor, spent time in places where the threats were human and the rules of engagement made sense. But I never forgot that night. Never stopped wondering what was really happening in those mountains. Over the years, I've heard stories, other soldiers, other bases, other encounters. Always vague, always classified, always buried under layers of denial and paperwork. But the pattern was there if you knew where to look. Remote training areas, unexplained equipment failures, teams going silent then suddenly extracted. Official reports that read like cover-ups. How many times has it happened? How many soldiers have been sent into those mountains, those forests, those valleys, not knowing they were part of an experiment? And the biggest question, the one that keeps me up at night, what happens when the research is done? When they've gathered all the data they need, what then? Are they trying to protect these creatures, or are they figuring out how to eliminate them? I don't know. And that scares me more than anything I saw that night, because I remember the way those things looked at us. The intelligence, the restraint. They could have killed us, but they chose not to. They just wanted us out of their home. And if the day comes when the government decides they're a threat, when the classified reports turn into operational orders, those creatures won't stand a chance. Not against what we can bring to bear. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel guilty for my part in it, for providing the data that might one day be used against them. But then I remember the fear, the helplessness, the way we ran through that forest like prey. And I think maybe some things are better left alone. Maybe some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Maybe some territories should remain unmarked on our maps. But I also know that's not how we work. Humans push boundaries. We explore. We classify. We control. It's what we do. And somewhere in the Cascade Mountains, in the deep forests where the fog never lifts and the compasses spin for no reason, they're still there, watching, waiting, living their lives in the shadows while men in laboratories study reports and plan their next move. I just hope when that move comes, they're ready, because we sure as heck weren't. I left the military in 2025, took my discharge papers, and a head full of memories I couldn't share with anyone. Tried civilian life, worked security for a while, then took a job with a private contractor doing risk assessment for construction projects in remote areas. The work kept me moving, kept me distracted, but it also put me in places most people avoided. Deep wilderness, areas marked on maps but rarely visited. And that's when I started noticing the patterns. It was 3 years after that night in the Cascades when I found myself on a job site in northern Idaho, near the Selkirk Mountains. The construction company wanted to put in a logging road, and my job was to assess terrain stability and environmental risks. Standard stuff. But when I met with the local Forest Service liaison, an older guy named Bill Hicks who'd been working these mountains for 30 years, something he said stopped me cold. You military? He asked, looking at the way I carried myself. Was. Thought so. You've got that look. Seen some things. He paused, studying me. You ever work in Washington? Cascade Range. I kept my face neutral. Why do you ask? Because you've got the same look as the last guy who came through here with contractor credentials, military background, asking questions about terrain, wildlife patterns, unusual animal activity. Said he was doing environmental assessment. Hicks leaned back in his chair. But he spent most of his time asking about the old logging roads, the ones that got closed down in the 90s, the ones that lead into territories where crews stopped working because too many people went missing. People go missing in the wilderness all the time, I said carefully. Sure they do, but not experienced loggers, not entire crews who know these mountains better than their own backyards. He pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. This is off the record. Company doesn't know I have this. Government doesn't know I kept copies. Inside were incident reports, dozens of them dating back to the 1970s. Loggers reporting equipment vandalized. Massive trees pushed over. Strange vocalizations at night. Search and rescue operations for missing workers that turned up nothing. No bodies, no blood, just abandoned gear and enormous footprints. The reports always described as bear tracks, unusual size. How many? I asked. 17 confirmed disappearances in this region alone over 40 years. Probably more that weren't reported. Families who just accepted that the mountains claimed their loved ones. He tapped the folder. And every time, the Forest Service would close the area temporarily, cite safety concerns, then quietly reopen it a few months later. No explanations, no follow-up, just move along. Nothing to see here. I thought about what Dr. Vance had told me. Controlled exposure data collection. You think the government knows? I think the government has always known. And I think people like you, people like that last contractor, you're all part of something bigger, something they're not telling us. He leaned forward. So I'm going to ask you straight. What the heck is in these mountains? I should have stonewalled, should have played dumb, cited my NDA, walked away. But Hicks had lost friends to these mountains. He deserved something. I can't tell you what I saw, I said slowly. But I can tell you this. If the Forest Service closes an area and tells you it's for safety, believe them. And if you ever find yourself in the deep wilderness, and things start feeling wrong, compasses spinning, radios dead, silence in the trees, don't investigate. Leave fast. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. That's what I thought. After that meeting, I couldn't let it go. I started digging carefully, using contacts I'd made during my service, calling in favors, piecing together fragments. What I found was a network of incidents stretching across the Pacific Northwest, the Rockies, the Appalachian Mountains. Anywhere with deep, old-growth forest and rugged terrain, the reports were always similar. Equipment failure, unexplained disappearances, strange sounds, massive tracks, and always government agencies showing up, conducting investigations that went nowhere, filing reports that classified everything as natural causes or wildlife encounters or human error. But beneath the official explanations, there was a pattern, a project. I found references to something called Ursus Protocol buried in declassified documents from the 1960s. The files were heavily redacted, but the gist was clear. The Department of Defense, in cooperation with the Forest Service and other agencies, had been monitoring and documenting reports of unknown bipedal hominids for decades. The stated purpose was threat assessment, understanding whether these entities posed a risk to national security, to civilian populations, to military operations in wilderness areas. But the real purpose, reading between the lines, was something else. They wanted to know if these creatures could be controlled, studied, used. I found job postings for wildlife biologists and terrain specialists with security clearances that made no sense for civilian positions. I found procurement records for specialized tracking equipment, infrared cameras, audio recording systems, all deployed to remote forest locations with no public explanation. And I found casualty reports, not many and never official, but buried in veterans forums and support groups. I found soldiers telling stories, training exercises gone wrong, encounters with aggressive wildlife, teams extracted under mysterious circumstances, always with the same pattern. Sign the papers, keep quiet, move on. How many others had been through what we went through? How many were still out there carrying the weight of what they'd seen, unable to talk about it? I reached out to Ramirez. Took me months to find him. He'd gone off-grid, living in a small town in Arizona, working construction. When I finally got him on the phone, he was quiet for a long time. "Why are you digging into this?" he finally asked. "Because I need to know if what happened to us was an isolated incident or part of something bigger." "It's bigger," he said flatly. "Way bigger. And the more you dig, the more dangerous it gets for you." "You've been looking into it too?" "For a while. Then I stopped. You know why? Because people who ask too many questions about this stuff have a way of disappearing. Not into the woods, into the system. Psychiatric holds, discredited, made to look unstable." "Has anyone approached you?" "No." 3 months after we got out, a man showed up at my house. Civilian clothes, government ID. Said he was with a research program studying post-traumatic stress in soldiers who'd experienced unusual wildlife encounters. Wanted to know if I'd be willing to participate in a study. Paid, of course. I told him no. And he smiled, said that was fine, then told me he hoped I was adjusting well to civilian life and that sometimes the best way to process trauma was to let it go. Not talk about it, not think about it, just let it go. Ramirez's voice went cold. It was a threat. They wanted to make sure I stayed quiet. "Did they ever come back?" "No, because I took the hint. And you should too. Whatever you're trying to find, it's not worth your life." But I couldn't stop. Because the more I learned, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't about a few isolated incidents. This was a systematic, long-term operation to monitor and document an entire species that officially didn't exist. And the scariest part, they were getting more aggressive with their research. I found references to live capture attempts in heavily redacted military reports, equipment requisitions for tranquilizer systems powerful enough to drop large primates, construction contracts for secure holding facilities in remote locations described only as wildlife research stations. They weren't just studying these creatures anymore. They were trying to capture them. I thought about that night in the Cascades. The intelligence I'd seen in those amber eyes, the restraint they'd shown. They could have killed us, but they chose not to. What would happen when that restraint ran out? When they realized humans weren't just passing through their territory anymore, but actively hunting them? I tried to reach Carter, but his number was disconnected. I called his last known address in Montana, but the person who answered said he'd moved away years ago. No forwarding information. Porter had vanished into the military bureaucracy, transferred so many times, I lost the trail. Donnelly was dead. I found his obituary from 2027. Heart attack, it said. But he was only 62, healthy, active. I wondered if it was really his heart that gave out or if someone decided he knew too much. That left Callahan. Colonel Callahan, now stationed at the Pentagon. I managed to get a message to him through official channels. Just a simple request to speak, citing our shared service. He called me back within an hour. "I was wondering when you'd reach out," he said. "No pleasantries, no small talk. You've been asking questions, making people nervous. I just want to know the truth. The truth is classified. You signed papers agreeing to that. Those papers were signed under duress and you know it." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Tired. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know what happened to us wasn't an accident. I want to know we were sent there deliberately, and I want to know what they're planning to do with all the data they've collected." "Yes, you were sent there deliberately. Your unit was selected because of your experience, your reliability, and your security clearances. You were meant to make contact, observe, and report. That was the mission you weren't briefed on." He sighed. "As for what they're planning, I don't know. I'm not read into that part of the operation. But I can tell you this. There are people at levels above me who believe these entities represent both a threat and an opportunity. And when people in power see opportunity, they exploit it. Even if it means violating every ethical boundary we have, especially then, because to them these aren't people. They're not protected by law, by rights, by international conventions. They're anomalies, unknown biological assets, property of whoever can claim them first." The words hit me like a punch. They're going to weaponize them. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Another long silence, then, stop digging. For your own sake, you've served your country. You've done your part. Let someone else carry this burden. I can't. Then you're a fool and you'll end up like the others who couldn't let it go. He hung up. I sat there, phone in my hand, and realized I'd reached the end of the line. Every path I'd followed led to the same place. Classified programs, disappeared people, and a government apparatus designed to keep the truth buried. But I'd learned enough. Enough to know that what happened to us in the Cascades was just one small piece of a much larger picture. Enough to know that somewhere in the wilderness of North America, maybe in dozens of locations, a species that had avoided human contact for thousands of years was being systematically hunted, documented, and targeted for purposes I could only guess at. And enough to know that one day, maybe soon, the precarious balance between their world and ours would shatter. When that happened, when the truth finally came out, whether through a leak, a whistleblower, or an incident too big to cover up, the world would have to answer for what we'd done in the name of national security. I just hoped when that day came, we were ready for the consequences. It's been 15 years since that night in the Cascade Mountains. 15 years of carrying a secret that weighs heavier with each passing day. I'm older now, grayer, with scars that don't show on the outside, but run deep nonetheless. And I've made a decision that will probably cost me everything. I'm breaking my silence. Not through official channels, not through the media that would twist my story into sensationalism, but here, now, in the way soldiers have always passed down the truth when the system tried to bury it. Word of mouth, one person to another, a warning from someone who's been there to those who might follow. After my conversation with Callahan, I stopped actively investigating. Not because I wanted to, but because I realized the people I was up against had resources I couldn't match. They could make me disappear with a phone call, discredit me with a few falsified psychiatric records, silence me permanently if they deemed it necessary. But silence comes with a cost, too. Every day I said nothing. I carried the weight of knowing others might be sent into those mountains unprepared. Every night I lay awake wondering if capture teams were out there right now, tracking creatures that had done nothing but defend their territory. So I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every document I'd found, every piece of evidence I'd collected over the years. Not to publish, not yet, but to preserve, to make sure that if something happened to me, the information wouldn't die with me. I left copies with 3 different people, none of whom know about the others. A lawyer with instructions to release the documents if I die under suspicious circumstances. A journalist I trust with a background in military cover-ups. And an old friend from my service days who lives off-grid in Alaska, beyond the reach of easy intimidation. It's a dead man's switch. Insurance. The only leverage I have left. But documentation isn't enough. The real question that's haunted me for 15 years is this: what moral obligation do we have to creatures that exist in the shadows of our world? Creatures that have avoided us, lived alongside us in secret, asked nothing but to be left alone. Some would argue they're dangerous, that the military has an obligation to monitor potential threats. And yes, they're powerful. Yes, they could kill if threatened. But in every documented encounter I found, aggression only occurred when humans pushed into their territory. When we threatened them first. They're not monsters. They're survivors. A species that's learned to exist in the margins, in the places we haven't yet destroyed with development and industry. And now, because we've discovered them, because we've documented them, we've decided we have the right to control them. It's the same pattern humans have followed for millennia. Find something we don't understand, study it, classify it, exploit it, and when it resists, destroy it. I think about those creatures in the Cascade Mountains often. Do they remember us? The soldiers who stumbled into their territory that night? Do they tell their young about the strange bipeds with artificial lights and loud weapons who ran through the forest in panic? Or have they moved on, finding deeper wilderness, more remote valleys where human presence hasn't yet reached? I hope so. I hope they're smart enough to stay hidden, to keep moving, to avoid the tracking teams I know are still out there. But I also know the wilderness is shrinking. Development pushes further into remote areas every year. Climate change disrupts habitats. The places where they can hide are becoming fewer and farther between. And when there's nowhere left to retreat to, what happens then? That's what keeps me up at night. Not the memory of being chased through the forest. Not the fear I felt facing something stronger and larger than myself. But the knowledge that we're forcing a confrontation, that our inability to coexist with anything we don't control will eventually lead to conflict we could have avoided. I've thought about going public many times, writing a book, doing interviews, breaking my NDA, and accepting the consequences. But every time I get close, I think about what Ramirez said. People who ask too many questions disappear, not just physically. Their credibility vanishes. They become jokes, conspiracy theorists, unstable veterans clinging to PTSD-induced fantasies. And even if people believed me, what would change? Would the government admit to decades of secret operations? Would they shut down the Ursus protocol and leave these creatures in peace? Or would public knowledge just accelerate their plans, push them to act before international pressure could stop them? Sometimes ignorance is safer for them if not for us. But I can't stay completely silent either. So I'm doing what I can. Sharing information with the right people. Warning soldiers who might be sent on similar training exercises to watch for the signs. Malfunctioning equipment, unnatural silence, tracks that don't match known animals. Telling them that if they encounter something they can't explain, the smart move is to leave, not engage. I've made contact with others like me, people who've had encounters who've been forced to sign NDAs who carry the same burden. We don't organize. We don't meet in person, but we share information carefully, watching each other's backs, making sure that if one of us disappears, others will know it wasn't an accident. It's a strange kind of resistance. Quiet, hidden, probably ineffective in the grand scheme of things, but it's something. It's refusing to let the truth die completely. Porter reached out to me last year. Took me by surprise. He'd found my contact information through a mutual friend. Took a risk sending that first encrypted email. We talked for hours. Two men who'd been through something impossible trying to make sense of it across a video call. "Do you regret it?" he asked. That night, signing the papers, staying quiet, I thought about it for a long time. I regret that we were used, that we were sent in there without being told the truth. But the encounter itself? No. Because now I know and I can't be lied to about what's possible anymore. You think they'll ever go public with it? Only if they have to. If something goes wrong and they can't contain it, or if they've already achieved their objectives and there's no reason to hide anymore. I paused. Neither scenario ends well for those creatures. Then what do? We remember, we document, and we hope that when the truth comes out, there are enough people like us who will stand up and say these beings have a right to exist without being hunted, studied, or weaponized. It's not much, but it's all we have. I still work as a contractor, still spend time in remote areas. And yes, I still look for signs, not to document them for any government program, but to know they're still out there, that they're surviving despite everything we've done. Sometimes I find tracks. Sometimes I hear sounds in the distance that make my heart race the way it did that night 15 years ago. And sometimes in the deep forest where human presence is rare, I feel watched, not threatened, just observed. I like to think they remember, too, that somewhere in their collective knowledge passed down through generations, there's a story about the night humans stumbled into their valley and then ran away. A reminder that we're dangerous, yes, but also weak, confused, lost in the wilderness we pretend to own. Maybe that knowledge will help them survive. Help them stay hidden long enough that by the time we're ready to coexist peacefully, there are still some left to coexist with. Or maybe I'm being naive. Maybe the trajectory is set and all I'm doing is delaying the inevitable. Maybe the government will eventually capture one, dissect it, study it, and then hunt down the rest to prevent any inconvenient questions about what we've lost. But I refuse to believe that's the only possible future. I have to believe that humanity is capable of more than domination and exploitation. That we can learn to share the planet with other intelligent species, even if they're not human. Call it hope, call it delusion, but it's what keeps me going. So why am I telling you this now? Why risk everything to share this story? Because silence is complicity, and I've been complicit long enough. If you're reading this, if you're listening to this story, I have one request. Don't dismiss it as fantasy. Don't file it away as just another Bigfoot tale told by someone looking for attention. The creatures in those mountains are real. The government programs studying them are real, and the moral questions about how we treat other intelligent species are real. What you do with that information is up to you. But at least now you know. The way I wish I'd known before they sent us into the Cascade Mountains that October night in 2019. The way I wish every soldier knew before they're sent on a training exercise in remote wilderness with equipment that mysteriously malfunctions and orders that don't quite make sense. Watch for the signs. Question the mission. And if you find yourself surrounded by fog in a forest gone silent with compasses spinning and something large moving just beyond your sight, remember this. You're not the first. You won't be the last. But you can choose what you do with what you witness. You can sign the papers and bury the truth. Or you can remember, document, and when the time is right, speak. I've made my choice. Now you have to make yours. As for me, I'll keep doing what I can. Keep warning those who will listen. Keep hoping that somewhere in the deep wilderness, they're still out there, still free, still watching us with those amber eyes that saw through our weapons and our fear and chose mercy over violence. They were the bigger people that night, literally and figuratively. The question is, when will we be? The forest remembers. The mountains remember. And those of us who walked through that valley 15 years ago, we remember too. We carry the weight of what we saw, the burden of what we were forced to hide, and the hope, however fragile, that the truth will matter when it finally comes to light. Until then, if you're watching this, if you've made it this far, I'll leave you with the same words I wish someone had told me before that night. The wilderness is not empty. It never has been. And the things that live in the shadows have just as much right to exist as we do. Remember that. Remember us. And when the day comes that you have to choose between silence and truth, I hope you're braver than I was. I hope you speak sooner before it's too late. You made it to the end. If the story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. Have you ever experienced something in the wilderness you couldn't explain? Let us know. Your story matters. Until next time, stay safe out there and remember, some boundaries exist for a reason.